Welcome to the Dynasty Playbook, Dynasty Fantasy Football Subreddit's dedicated podcast. I'm your host, Drew. You can find me on Reddit at EAF Marine and on Twitter at Drew Dodson NFL. With me is my co-host, Tyler. You can find him on Reddit at Barles and on Twitter at HBomb9508. And we welcome you to our late night edition of Dynasty Playbook, where our takes are lazier and we get off point way, way easier. How you doing tonight, bud?
Man, I'm doing good, and it is late. So hopefully we can stay on point here and not nod off a little bit.
It is 12:30 our time. We stayed up waiting for Scott, and then Scott got held up. You know, what? Waiting on West Coast people, thinking that they just own the clock. But let's hop in and let's knock this thing out. And I want to start off with something I'm dealing with in one of my leagues right now, where we're looking at expanding our league from a single QB to a super flex league. It's currently going up to a vote right now, but I was hoping to get your input on, you know, how much of a time. I'm trying to think of a good way to word this, but how much notice do you think you should give before doing something like that? You know, so teams can make the proper adjustments so they can draft accordingly. Because the original suggestion was to do it for 2016. That way you could draft for 2015, you could draft for 2016, and it would take effect for the 2016 season. My immediate suggestion was let's kick it back to 2017, or at least the end of the 2016 season. That way people have more time to adjust, more time to get ready. The guys who aren't as ready don't get screwed. But I'm interested to kind of hear your take on it.
So this is a pretty drastic change going from a 1 QB to a super flex. I don't think that can be overstated how big of a change that is. First off, I would think it needs to require 100% unanimous approval, because there's bound to be that 1 QB hoarder out there who has Matt Ryan and Ryan Tannehill and Andy Dalton. He's like, yeah, let's go super flex. Let's do it right now. And then there's the other guy who has one starter. Let's call him Drew Brees, who's 35, 36 years old. And then he's got Brian Hoyer on the bench. And he's like, nah, no way. I don't want to do this. So I would think it needed 100% approval. And I would say 2017 would be a minimum, as to when to make the change. But then there's also that wrinkle of what's it going to do to these rookie drafts? Well, what are these guys going to do? They know the change is coming. So Jameis Winston all of a sudden goes from back into the first to a potential 101, or a top 4 rookie pick, which could also screw a team up for next year. So for me, unless the league is 100% fully on board, I just don't see it being a very smooth transition. I could see it being kind of a mess. Just, because guys build their teams with league structure in mind. So I'm not real sure where you're at on it, but if it were me, that would be something that I wouldn't be in favor of it no matter how my team looked, just because of the way that it affects the league overall. And, honestly, it could be something where, and I hate to leave a league, but that would be something that I could see myself leaving a league over that drastic of a structure change.
Yeah, and I can definitely see where you're coming from. Personally, my team in there has Russell Wilson and Johnny Manziel as my number 2. So I'm clearly not set up for quarterback for Superflex success. I am and I'm not. My team can still succeed as a legitimate team in a Superflex if I just don't start a second QB. So there is that aspect. It's not a legitimate 2 QB league. But, there's those teams that one team has Peyton Manning and RG3. By the time this change takes effect, Peyton Manning will be gone, and RG3 will be their only legitimate option. Yeah, they'll have chances to draft and trade for other guys, but it's still a fairly drastic change that sets them up for failure just a little bit more. And then there's guys that, you talk about Matt Ryan and Ryan Tannehill. Guy actually has Matt Ryan and Cam Newton, I think, which is pretty well set up. Which it's rewarding him for heavily investing in a position that you don't really need to in the league setting that we had or currently have. And I'm kind of agree more with you that it needs to be 100% unanimous. And I talked to my commission about it a decent amount, and his initial thought was, just anything over 50-50. And I talked him down from that. And this is the first league he's commissioned. This is his second year doing it, so I've kind of helped talk him through it a decent amount. And I said, anything that requires a league vote, I'm sitting on the side of it. It's a 12-man league. I want at least 8 guys voting for something before he changed something. And for something like this, I mean, I wouldn't be happy with not doing 100%, but I'd need at least 10 people. And the only reason I say 10 is because that league's already had a decent amount of turnover because it started with a lot of local people for him. And they're new to Dynasty, so there's bound to be a lot of turnover. But I'm kind of siding with you. The more we talk about it, the more I think about it, that it probably needs to be a unanimous decision.
I mean, just think about the startup values. I mean,
yeah.
Wow. I'm perfectly comfortable. If I don't get a stud QB, man, I'm going to punt. And I'm going to punt for a long time at QB. And so a guy, let's use Ryan Tannehill. In a normal startup, we're probably looking at a top 100 player, but we're probably looking at a 7th or 8th rounder. In a 1 QB league, I think that's probably about right. In a 2 QB league, we're talking about potentially a first rounder or a second
top
rounder.
15.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a premium pick. So the values just get super wonky in a deal like that. So I would almost say if they want to go super flex, just say, hey, man, we're running a new league. Who's coming with me? Because I love super flex. I love 2 QB. It's a blast. But trying to transition a league from 1 QB to 2 QB or super flex is a very, very sketchy proposition to me.
Yeah. Now, with the thought on voting to change rosters, does that opinion translate to, voting to get rid of kickers or team defenses? Do you think this is something that needs any sort of notice, multiple years in advance, or requires, 100% league support to do so?
Nah, no way. 7 out of 12 is good for that, right? It's just because I mean, if somebody's heavily invested in a kicker or a defense, or they took them early in the startup, come on. They're not going to stay in the league very long anyway because they're jokers. So if a league can get that passed by just a simple majority, go for it. Put it in, institute it immediately. Kickers are gone the next season, same as team defenses. And who's carrying them through the offseason anyway, unless the roster requirements are set that you have to keep a minimum. So, I could boot those 2 positions pretty easily.
Yeah. You say that, but I actually had the issue in one of my leagues this offseason. I put it up to a vote to get rid of kickers, and we got vocal opposition from one league member who had 2 quote unquote high value kickers. One of them was Goskowski, and the other was, hell if I know. I don't know who a high value kicker is anymore, or ever, I guess. But he actually swayed the commissioner's opinion to the point where the commissioner was actually required 100% league approval before we got rid of kickers.
Well, I mean, when you sign up for the league, you know what it is. There are kickers there. I'm in a few leagues with kickers, and I don't. It's not the worst thing in the world. It's not the best.
Yeah.
But like I say, if they can get a simple majority to go through to get rid of them, I don't see any problem instituting it immediately. If it's something that's a league-breaking kind of thing, I'd probably back off and just roll with my kicker. I'm not going to be the guy that throws a fit about something like that.
Yeah, I agree, and that's a stance I took. I mean, we had the majority, but I said, yeah, that's fine. I'll just submit it again next year, and I'll wear you down eventually.
Pound them into submission.
That's right. I'll be right, and I'm willing to wait to be right. I can ask my wife. But with that, we'll let that one go. We'll move on to our IDP spotlight, and we're gonna move away from doing some of our sleepers, and we're gonna hit on a top guy who hasn't been getting as much spotlight this year, and that's Robert Quinn, who, believe it or not, I mean, you might think I'm crazy, but at least I'm not crazy by myself. I actually had Robert Quinn as my number one defensive end last year over J.J. Watts. Granted, it wasn't significantly. He was the 1A to J.J. Watts 1B, but I thought Robert Quinn legitimately had more upside. To me, J.J. Watt was kind of the only name in town, whereas Quinn was going to get more opportunities because defenses weren't going to be able to double team him. They couldn't afford to. Not with Brockers and Aaron Donald and Long in there. It's just, I thought he was going to feast. And the second half of the season, he still did. But I know Tyler actually agreed with me on that opinion, so I'll let you chime in.
Yeah, I mean, this time a year ago, if I'm picking between Watt and Quinn, I'm taking Quinn. He's in the 4-3. He plays on that beastly defensive front. And, who knew J.J. Watt was going to do what he did last year? Oh, my God, J.J. Watt was unreal last year. But a lot of his stuff, he relies on the big plays, the swatted balls. He gets the interceptions. He forces fumbles. He's in the backfield. I mean, he's an outstanding player, but I'm still not entirely convinced that gap is just massive like everyone else is. I mean, right now we're getting J.J. Watt as a first-round IDP startup pick. You get Robert Quinn in the 5th. I don't think the gap's that big. If I had to put money on it, I'd say, yeah, Watt's going to be the leading point scorer on the defensive line, maybe number one IDP overall. But I wouldn't be shocked if Quinn outpoints him next year. I wouldn't be shocked if Quinn hangs 20 sacks next year. He was a monster in 2013, absolute monster. And last year his numbers weren't bad. I mean, it was rough to start, man. Like Drew said, the first half of the season, it was rough. But as you got closer towards the playoff push, you had Robert Quinn in your lineup last year. You were loving life because he was feasting. So he's still a stud. He's my number 2 overall, and pretty much everybody that I've seen has him as their number 2 overall. But like I said, I'm not convinced that gap is just, a Gronk type gap, where it's Gronk and then everybody else. I'm not so sure that it's Watt and then everybody else. I think Quinn's a little bit closer than the ADP would suggest.
Yeah, I think it's closer to how Graham and Gronk were last year. I think Watt is kind of how Graham was last year, where Watt's just a little bit behind him. But like you said, you wouldn't be surprised if you see Watt put up 20 sacks. I was actually ready to go ahead and put out my hot take and say I wouldn't be surprised to see Watt break the sack record at all. The guy's a stud, and when we say the start of the season was rough, I'm pretty sure it wasn't until week 7 that he had a sack. So for the first 6 weeks of the season, he didn't have a sack, and he still finished as a DN1.
Oh yeah, he was. I don't have it in front of me. He was definitely a top 12 defense. He was a top 5, I would imagine. I think it was Watt and JPP, and then I don't know, a few other guys, but I mean, he was right in the mix for sure. And another thing, he's 24 years old. He's 2 years younger than J.J. Watt, which is not an insignificant thing in Dynasty. At 24 years old, that's a young man, or at least he'll be 24 when the season starts. So that's another thing to take into consideration. I'm not advocating taking Quinn over Watt. I wouldn't do it. I would take Watt over Quinn 100% of the time that this year.
Yes, sir.
I'm just saying that we're still looking at an elite defensive end. I mean, elite with a capital E.
Yeah, and I know we didn't write him down to talk about, but I think the defensive end landscape for this year looks very similar to the tight end landscape of last year, with Chandler Jones kind of resembling the Julius Thomas in terms of value. I think he's not that far behind Robert Quinn. I think Chandler Jones is in that same elite tier. And I know we weren't planning on talking about two guys, but to me, he's another one of those guys that doesn't get the same recognition. And I know, people bring up the thought that if he gets transferred to a 3-4 linebacker, then his value goes out the window. That's fine. And that's, people have been saying that for 2 years and shit still hasn't happened. As long as he's a defensive end, he's my defensive end 3. He's tier 1, and the drop off after that is significant. I like JPP, but there's at least probably 4 or 5 rounds worth of startup round difference in their value for me.
You're not giving JPP enough credit. You've been guilty of that for a while. For me,
he's not my guy.
I mean, I have Chandler Jones as my 3, and I have JPP as my 4, and they're incredibly close for me. They're extremely close for me. And yes, in IDP world, especially with edge guys, we have to be leery of scheme changes. It can happen. It's not enough for me to not take Chandler Jones as defensive end 3, or I would have ranked him lower. But it's just something that has to be taken into consideration. Watt's insulated from that. Quinn is insulated from that, because even if Quinn were to go to a 3-4, he's still going to be a defensive end.
Yep.
So, it's something that it could happen at any time. Look what happened to Mario Williams and Jerry Hughes and DeMarcus Ware. The list goes on and on. Every year there are these scheme changes that just jack up dudes' values, and I mean jack them up. A guy goes from a 4-3 defensive end to a 3-4 outside linebacker. That is about the biggest drop in value that can be achieved in fantasy football, like that, at drop of a hat. That's all it takes is Rex Ryan coming to town and fucking your world. So it's certainly a possibility, but I love Chandler Jones too. He's a big time difference maker. I mean, a big time difference maker that fills up the box score when he's on the field.
Yeah, I think, and another reason I say he doesn't get the attention he rightfully deserves. If you look at his points per game, because he was injured for part of the season, his points per game, I'm pretty sure he was the DN too, and it was not that far behind JJ Watt. And you said I'm criminally low on JPP. He's much closer in my rankings in terms of tiers. He's much closer to my DN5 than he is to Chandler Jones.
See, and I have it just the opposite. I've got Watt tier 1, Quinn, Jones, JPP tier 2, and then a drop to the next little batch of Wilkerson, Ansah, Everson Griffin, those guys. So it's a clear top 4 for me. But we've disagreed on JPP for quite some time now. We've been having this debate for a hot minute, you and I have. But
since we started talking Dynasty together, since we joined that sub league and we started that startup draft.
And I take JPP and everywhere. I've got JPP running out my ears. And it worked out well last year. The back held up last year. He was beastly.
Yeah.
He was damn good. When he's on the field, he's another guy that puts up points.
Yep. And that'll do it for our IDP Spotlight for this week. And let's move on to our submitted questions. And our first one's coming from Shakessel. Said, if we had to pick one of these free agent running backs to add to your roster, who do you add? And the options he gives us are Chris Johnson, Ray Rice, Steven Jackson, and Ahmad Bradshaw. Who do you got?
Ahmad. That's the only one. That's the one name that jumps out at me. Maybe Steven Jackson. Maybe. I don't think so. Ray Rice. I don't want to get on my moral high horse with Ray Rice, but he's a piece of shit, and I don't want him on my roster. So that's pretty cut and dry for me. And I think Chris Johnson's done for any type of relevance. So Ahmad is definitely the guy out of that group that I'd take him right now on a roster right now and just roll with it and see what happens. And PT should be on this list too.
There's a couple of guys that aren't on this list that should be on this list.
Pierre Thomas should be on this list, and I'm holding Pierre on several of my win now dynasty rosters, and he's going to land somewhere. You don't know where it's going to be. He's going to land somewhere, and he's going to get some work as somebody's third down running back and continue to be what he's been for a long time, which is a serviceable PPR flex play.
Yeah. I don't think he'll quite have the value he had in New Orleans, but he'll be useful. And I agree that Ahmad Bradshaw is definitely that stands out in lights. Steven Jackson is it's like 35 now. I mean, he might not be that old, but he certainly seems like it. Chris Johnson, no. And Ray Rice, I agree. He's a piece of shit. And I mean, he's not even getting workouts, invites, nothing. Ahmad Bradshaw was a startable fantasy asset last year. And it wasn't. And the only reason he stopped was because he got injured, which, yeah, he's prone to do. But until he gets injured again, he'll be useful. And for a guy that's going to cost you nothing to get, that's exactly what you want. And in terms of guys who aren't on this list, my number one option for free agents, it's Noshawn Moreno, easily. I'm praying Dallas picks up Noshawn Moreno, and just everybody who's overspending on Darren McFadden and Ryan Williams and
Joe Randall. Yeah, Joseph Randall. Yeah. Schmucky the Clown.
Exactly.
It's
gonna be Lance Dunbar and Noshawn Moreno.
Yeah, Lance Dunbar. I didn't know we were still doing Lance Dunbar. You picked him the other day. I was like, I didn't know we were still doing that. I thought that was a last year thing. Hell, you never know in Dallas. But if Noshawn gets signed by Dallas, Twitter will melt. It will break. It will just crumble into a million pieces.
And I can't wait because every deep roster that I've drafted this year has Noshawn Moreno on it. Just waiting because he's got the best chance to perform out of any of the other late round guys, and we've actually seen him do it. Another guy that his name's not on this list is Ben Tate. You know, he did good things in Houston, and he did good things for a little bit in Cleveland. He's not a terrible running back. He just likes to get hurt.
I've always loved watching Ben Tate run. I mean, Ben Tate is super talented. I don't know. I guess it's the injuries, and then he was behind Arian Foster and all this, that, and the other. But I've always been really curious. What if Ben Tate could handle one of those big seasons where he's touching the ball 400 times? I'd like to see what he could do. Yeah, he could. I don't think he could ever do it, but he's got all the talent in the world to do that. And keep going back to Dallas. I don't know what's going on out there. We're all just throwing darts, trying to see who's going to win that job, but there's pretty much a bunch of bums out there right now. So, yeah.
Yep. And we'll move on to our next question. Comes from GPost86. It says, what do you do with Josh Gordon on your roster? And I'm going to give you a firm I don't know what to do with him. At this point, you got to hold him unless you can get anything resembling decent value. I'd move him for an early second. If I can move him for what his ADP value is right now, I'm doing it. But chances are you're not getting that.
Yeah, early second. Definitely I'd move him for an early second. I'd move him for a mid-second. If I could get my hands on a Jalen Strong or David Johnson type, I'd do that. It sucks. I actually had Josh Gordon off I had my last share of Josh Gordon sold off last year, late summer, straight up for Percy Harvin. It was pretty cool doing that. And then about 3 weeks ago, I got a trade offer in my inbox I've been trying to unload Torrey Smith for God knows how long. And I get an offer in my inbox, and it was Torrey in some pieces, for Cody Latimer in some pieces, and one of those pieces was Josh Gordon. But it was one of those trades that I'm just absolutely going to accept. And now Josh Gordon's back on my roster again. So chances are I'm just going to hold. I'm just going to ride it out. I'm not even putting him on the trade block. Somebody offers me something good for it, something that's reasonable, I'll take it. If not, I'm just going to ride it out and see what happens. But, yeah, there's no good situation. Nobody's going to want to pay what he's technically worth. You're not going to want to undersell him. So it's just a bad situation. And I hope that where you have him, it's not a shallow roster because it's going to be super tough to hang on to him all year.
Yeah, and I mean, I hate it because I was ready to go into last year with Josh Gordon as my 101. This kid, the guy is super, super talented, but he's retarded. He's an idiot. You know, I get it that his last infraction came on a technicality, but when you've been in as much trouble as you are, read the rule book back and forth, front and back, back to front. Don't get in trouble. Know what you're allowed to do. You know, he's got only himself to blame at this point. And I mean, I hope he can bring it back. I hope we can see him play because when he's playing, he's a blast to watch because he is an amazing player. But upstairs, he's just it ain't all there.
Yeah. Is he a butthole? Do we need to tell, hey, Josh Gordon, don't be a butthole?
Maybe he's got like a butthole for a brain, and it's just the brain butthole setting him up for failure.
Just butthole-ish tendencies.
Is he buttholio?
He is the great Butholio. What a terrible nickname.
All right. So this next one comes from our buddy Adam at AdamTZ on Twitter, and it's a 2 QB league question. Who is your lowest QB2 that makes you feel all right rolling out every week? Would you go as low as Palmer, Dalton, or are you fine with Mallett, McCown, Castle? And it's a 2-part question, so we'll hit up that second part after we touch on this first part. To me, Palmer and Dalton are fairly far apart. Dalton, I would have absolutely no problem with as my QB2. If he's my QB2, fantastic. I'm just fine with that because I punt my QB2 most of the times, and if I'm locking down Dalton, that means I was probably getting pretty good value on it. About as low as I'm willing to go is Alex Smith, who's like my QB 25, 26. So that's where I'd be comfortable. Now, 2 QB is a little different because I got to change my mindset. I'm so used to super flex, but I think Alex Smith is where I absolutely would have to draw the line. Whereas super flex, I've said it time and time again. I had no problem rolling out just bums, and the guys you listed, earlier, McCown, Castle, Mallett, I would not be okay with them as my QB2. I would be okay with Mallett having him as like a committee for my QB2 because I think he's gonna eventually lock down that starting job. But McCown and Castle are both looking at very limited time for the starting job, and I just wouldn't trust it. I would feel like I'm about to have a starting position on my lineup blow up in my face, and I would not be comfortable with that.
Yeah, for me, I would tend to group Mallett closer in with Dalton and Palmer. And I'm the same with you. If Dalton's my QB2, yeah, I'm okay with it. I don't love it. I tend to be more aggressive in wanting to lock down those QBs and get as much studliness going on at QB as I can. And I'm willing to pay for it too. And Drew has seen it. I will pay for a quarterback in 2 QB and Superflex. Palmer, for me, Palmer's fine, but what is he, 38, 39 years old? Is he that old? I mean, the dude is old. He's old.
He's like 35, 34 at that.
I thought he was older than that. But how much time does he have left?
Not a ton because of the injuries. I mean, he came out in the 02, 03 draft because he came in after Breeze.
Did he? I thought he was older than that. Maybe it's just because he gets around like a crusty old fart and can barely walk and has had every surgery known to man. Maybe I'm just plugging in bad information there. But Dalton as a QB2 is fine. McCown, if McCown was my QB2, that's a problem because I would be surprised if Johnny Football beats him out rather quickly this year. So yeah, I tend to be a lot more aggressive, but I'm gonna if at any point my QB2 is going to be a guy that's in the 18 to 24 range, I'm going to be looking to upgrade at all times. I'm always going to be seeking a way to get 2 top 10 QBs.
Yeah, to me that just it causes you to suffer in so many other positions. But his follow up kind of touches on this as well. Is this what's the importance of a QB2? Would you always prefer a stud like Tannehill as a QB2, or is it cool to roll with a slouch like listed above? I love the fact that Tannehill's getting listed as a stud now. I'm all about that. And it all depends on where you're getting the value. I'm not if I'm picking at the turn at the end of the first in a startup, and Tannehill and Matt Ryan are right there. I'm going QB, calling it a day, and then I'll pick up the skill positions where I can. But if I'm picking early in the first, I'm getting Rodgers, Luck, Cam Newton, and I'm skipping the QBs that are going to be at the end of the second round because it's going to be picked clean by then. I'm not willing to spend a late second on Jameis Winston or Teddy Bridgewater if he's there, or spend for an aging QB like Drew Brees or whoever may be there. So it's all about cost, and it's all about the opportunity cost of acquiring that player.
Yeah, I think you nailed it spot on. But one thing to keep in mind is that startup draft is likely going to be your lowest cost of acquisition for your QBs. Once you get into the league and we're talking about trade value, they're worth an ass ton. And especially in season, they're worth even more. Any starting QB is gonna hold some weight. But like I said before, I'm gonna get my QBs, guys, especially in a true 2 QB. Give me my QBs. And I'm willing to do some reach in there. I'm not going to take Matt Stafford over Julio Jones or anything like that. But I'm going to be willing to concede a little bit of quote-unquote value to make sure I'm locking down those 2 spots. And Carson Palmer's 35 years old. So, yes, I was way off. It is super late. Like super late. And I'm kind of rummy. You ever heard the term rummy? Just kind of out of it. Little buzzed. I'm under no influence whatsoever. Just kind of.
I mean, it is kind of 1 o'clock in the morning, so I get it. But our next question comes from Fresh West on Reddit. And it says, targeting a team's entire receiver or running back groups. Is it good or bad strategy? For example, I think it's good to lock up a decade of Andrew Luck's passes, but bad to try and get every Cowboys running back. It's very situational, I think. I think if you're looking at a situation like, I don't know, Denver's running back core, if you've already got CJ Anderson, I'm locking up all the rest of the options in case CJ doesn't pan out. But if I've got Le'Veon Bell, I don't give a shit about D'Angelo Williams. I don't. Because I'd rather just not have the production for the first 3 games than rather than waste the roster spot on D'Angelo Williams. And sometimes it just doesn't matter. Like, look at New Orleans. Owning Mark Ingram and owning CJ Spiller do not connect. They're inconsequential to each other. And owning wide receiver groups as a whole, to me, is not a good call for the most part because, yeah, I'm split on the decision because one half of me says if they're good enough to own on their own, they're good enough to own together. But at the same time, it does kind of increase the risk. It increases the variance of your week-to-week score because you're almost guaranteed to not have high-scoring games from both of them unless you've just got a 450-yard, 5-touchdown game, a Ben Roethlisberger from this past season. putting up just monster numbers, which are not the norm. So I think it's something I would avoid, but I'm not gonna go out of my way and reject value in order to avoid it.
Yeah, see, me with wideouts, I dislike having multiple wideouts from the same team in my starting lineup every week. I just don't like it because, like Drew said, you're gonna get poached at times, and unless you got like 2013 Demaryius Thomas and Eric Decker, where Peyton Manning's throwing 5 touchdowns a game, it's gonna be hard to find consistent production. So at wideout, I try to avoid it, and when not in a situation where I do have to, I try to move one of them almost every single time. Running back is situational, like Drew said, and I'm a guy, I tend to punt running back. So moves that I'll make, like let's take the Buffalo backfield, for example, right now. I don't own Shady McCoy anywhere, but I do still have those lingering Bryce Brown shares, and I'll pair him with Carlos Williams. Or like the Denver backfield. I don't have C.J. Anderson. I'm not going to pay C.J. Anderson's price right now to acquire him. I didn't get him last year at any point. I was just not ahead of the curve on the waiver wire on him. But I will take Monty Ball and Ronnie Hillman and pair them up. So I like to own groupings of backfields, especially when they're cheap, just because if and when they get some run, I get to pop a cheap running back into my lineup and touches equal at least some points, give me some semblance of a floor. So, that's how I tend to view running backs. I like to group them together. Like I said, especially when they're cheap.
Yeah, and there's also another type of situation where you got something like Seattle, where there's multiple talented players backing up the starting running back, where I'm not going to go ahead and roster or seek out Marshawn Lynch. For the most part, I mean, very rarely am I going to own Marshawn Lynch on any of my dynasty teams, but I'm gonna, if I've got Christian Michael, which chances are I probably do. I'm still one of those guys, but if I've got him, I'm pairing him up with Robert Turbin because Turbin's a legit talent in his own right. People will hear me arguing that Turbin's that 3 down back, and that if Lynch goes down, Christian Michael would take his place. But that's not me arguing against Turbin's talent. I think Turbin could very well pull a Michael Turner and go somewhere after his contract's up and go be a starting running back somewhere. And now that Thomas Rawls is getting some play and getting some name recognition, I'll be rostering him on my deeper rosters because I'm going to be taking a chance on whatever is going to play out when Marshawn Lynch retires. And a little shout out to Thomas Rawls. His mom is a huge supporter of him on Twitter. And if you talk nice about him on Twitter, his mom will message you and follow you, and she'll say all sorts of nice things about him to you. It's the funniest thing ever, and super awesome.
That's pretty cool. I love it when you get those interactions on Twitter like that. That's pretty fun stuff.
Yep. But I think that'll hit that one up pretty well. And the next one's going to be kind of in the same vein. It comes from at I am Sports 007, and it's who are the top running back handcuffs to own. And I think this conversation begins and ends with 2 players, and it's Christian Michael and Niall Davis. Already admitted, still a Christian Michael believer. Willing to pay loving the price you're getting him for in startups right now, because I was willing to pay the price you were paying for him in startups last year until he was going in like the mid-4th, and then I wasn't. But Niall Davis, when Jamal Charles isn't playing, RB1, lock and load. So those are easy running back handcuffs for me. Anybody else you think we're missing?
I've got Niall Davis on a ton of rosters. I love it just because Charles is probably going to miss some time, and either I'm going to pop him into my lineup or I'm going to trade him for a king's ransom. It works out pretty well either way. You're going to hate me calling him a handcuff, but I'm going to do it anyway. Trey Mason. Pretty damn valuable handcuff. Ryan Matthews. should be somewhat of a handcuff. I don't know if we're going to call it a timeshare, but I mean, I'm going to expect that DeMarco gets the lion's share of the carries in Philly. Chris Polk is interesting to me right now because Alfred Blue's okay, but if I had to say I want Arians backup, it's Chris Polk right now for me. That's the guy that I would want to have. So I mean, there are
Kenny Hilliard.
Well, we put Kenny Hilliard and Alfred Blue together, we might get 40% of Arian Foster, right?
I don't know what it is about Houston wanting to draft all of LSU's bad running backs.
I don't get it. But hey, Alfred Blue was pretty effective last year, and the leagues where I owned Arian, I had Alfred Blue, and I was able to pop him in and got, decent weeks out of him. We had one massive week out of him. We had like 40-something carries. He had a huge week.
Yeah, Alfred Blue was by far the least efficient running back out of all the rookies last year, though. Just throwing that out there, though.
Put up points when Arian was out. I mean, at some point in these leagues, everybody knows how difficult running back is to fill. So if you can get a guy that is going to start and get 15 or 20 touches, he's worth having around.
For sure. I just don't think that he's got enough talent to stick around in Houston.
That's what I said. I'd rather have Polk. If I'm in the business of handcuffing Arian Foster, Chris Polk's the guy I want.
Absolutely.
If you're listening to us, Ian, give me Chris Polk. We're trying to make a deal here. We're trying. Just give me what I want. Nobody gets hurt. Can we consider Terrence West a handcuff in that whole convoluted clusterfuck in Cleveland? Yeah.
Sure, I guess.
Why not? I mean, they're all over the place. Old man James Starks, who's older than you think he is, has been a pretty solid little backup. Yeah. I don't know what the hell's going on in Green Bay, but the list goes on and on.
Technically, Jerick McKinnon's a handcuff right now.
Yeah. But yeah, it's Nile and it's C. Mike, and then it's everybody else for me.
Trey Mason.
Yeah, Trey Mason. I know that breaks your heart, but
yeah, I'm the healing has begun.
You're semi over it.
I wouldn't say I'm over it, but I'm learning to live with it.
You're going to get some. I mean, Gurley is not going to come out and just rock socks week one. Trey Mason's going to get a ton of run next year. He's going to be super valuable next year. And we don't know what's going to happen from that point forward, but it's still a pretty big piece to own right now for me anyway. I mean, in my estimation.
Yeah, and one more sneaky name for a decent handcuff is going to be Kyrie Robinson up in New Orleans. If they hadn't re-signed Mark Ingram, this guy would have seen a huge surge in value, in my opinion. And I think if he had just been handed the keys to this backfield to get 20 carries a year or 20 carries a game, he could have been an RB1. He's got some legit talent. And if Ingram goes down, like it looks like is kind of the trend.
Like he will. You mean?
Yeah.
Go ahead and say it. He will. It's not a hot take. He will.
Yeah. Shh. I'm trying to be happy.
God, but Kyrie's one of those guys. It's like, God, he's been on my roster for 28 years. And you just keep him on and keep him on and keep him on. And you get to play him 2 or 3 games a year. But man, he's been a tough hold. You know what I mean? About saying that, a tough hold, a guy that's tough to hang on to when the bye weeks and the injuries hit.
Nope, easy to hold on to.
Such a homer.
It's easy for me. I watched what he did to Philadelphia in the playoffs.
Yeah, he has looked good. He has looked good. And at one point in time in 2015 redraft, he will be the waiver wire darling again, as he has been in recent memory anyway.
All right, and we got a last-minute submitted question. This one didn't even make it to the script, and it's from @Jan Swanson, and it says, "Would you prefer Trey McBride or Dante Fowler as a taxi stash? 10-team, must start 2 defensive linemen and up to 5 wide receivers." And I love me some Trey McBride, but it's Dante Fowler for me pretty easily.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, that's an IR stash. That's even better than a taxi stash for me. An IR stash, because you can't just put anybody on the IR. You can just throw them on that IR and let them sit and simmer for a year. Yeah, these two
he won't have IR designation off the bat, but he'll get it eventually.
Yeah, you'll be able to put him there. And These guys are way apart in my rookie draft rankings, and like I like Trey McBride, and we had a nice little debate on Voxer today of Devin Smith versus Trey McBride. And hell, me and True are the only people on earth that are taking Trey McBride, so we clearly like him. But it's big time Fowler for me.
Yep. And Jan Swanson also had another question that he did not submit to the podcast, but we're going to submit it for him anyways. And it says, so can we go ahead and just start calling Brashad Perriman Predator? And I'm going to go with an emphatic yes, because good God, that is so much forehead.
It's unbelievable. And we're not calling him, and I don't know if he was referring to his style of play, because this is purely based upon looks. I mean, my
it has
God,
to be.
It's unbelievable. I mean, the guy he could be the poster. If Rogaine were to invest in Brashad Perriman, they could get places, because that hairline is running away, man. It is receding so fast. He looks like he's 70 years
what's
old.
faster? Is his hairline receding faster than his blazing 40?
Then the 4.26, his hairline's running a 4.24. Book it.
That's fantastic. And we got one awesome question left coming from Andy MC. He says he's got a question coming at you straight up live and inside from London. So that's pretty cool. We got one coming from across the lake. It's why is it the majority of dynasty leagues don't use contracts, salary systems, and startup auctions? It seems to me that without these tools, dynasty leagues effectively become forever keeper leagues. Without contracts and salaries, the value of players becomes totally skewed. There's a lot less flexibility with rosters, and it creates an environment where teams don't have to fork out as much for the best talent. Once a player is yours, it seems he's yours forever. My biggest issue with contract leagues is you get people in them that either don't think long term, or they just don't understand it well enough, and they play for a year, they might play for 2 years, and they fuck up their team, and they leave this just shell of a team for someone else to come and pick up. And it leaves you with a league full of teams that have to get replaced within 2 or 3 years. And it even if you bring in, talented dynasty minds, there's no guarantee that the thoughts are going to translate.
My issue is that I play Dynasty for fun. I love it. It's super fun. Math is not fun. Algebra is not fun. It's cut and dry for me. I'm in I don't know, 18, 20 leagues. I don't have time for that crap. That's why I don't do it. It's not a knock against it at all. And you talk to guys that are in the contract leagues and the cap leagues, and they love it. I've never heard anybody say I'm in a cap league and I hate it. So I'm not knocking it at all, but it's personally, on a personal level, it ain't for me, man. It's just not. I could barely get through a freaking auction draft without losing my mind. I can't imagine being in a long-running dynasty league where I've got to take all that stuff into consideration. So I get all the points that you're making. It's just not for me. Not my speed.
Yeah, the only other thing for me that seems like it might be a potential issue with contract leagues is when you have to throw contracts and salary caps into the situation, it seems like getting trades done would become even more difficult, to the point where you either have to give up way more values than you want to dump a garbage salary, or you don't have the cap room to get trades done. And besides the leagues I'm in with that are just ridiculously active, it's rough trying to get trades done. And I don't want anything that's going to hinder it further. And it seems like it would be, really interesting. It would add another wrinkle of strategy to it. But like Tyler said, I'm just in too many leagues, and I really can't afford the time to devote all this energy to just one league out of, all the leagues I'm in.
Yeah, I mean, and then waivers and golly, it just seems it's just over my head. I'm just not a smart guy. I don't have the mental chops for all dim numbers. It's just not my thing. And I've seen some of these trades that come across these things, and like Drew said, they get super unbalanced because somebody's just got to make a salary dump. Like I've got AJ Green, whoever, on this massive contract, and my team is terrible. And there's only one other team in the league that can take on his contract, and they're going to send me 3 crappy players, one of whom I'm going to cut just to free up some cap space. It just a little wonky for me, but I get it. And Adam Sticky, our good buddy Sticky, he loves his contract league. We've talked about it on several occasions. But when I see trade advice come up and say, "Oh, it's contract league," and I have this guy at 5 years for 12 million, I just la 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 la. I just can't compute it. Just can't even do it.
Yeah, me either. And I think that'll put a nice bow on that. So I've done a fair amount of ranting in my time here, but Tyler, do you have anything you'd like to rant about this week?
I feel like I've got some angst built up. I'm still kind of ticked off about the whole Sammy Watkins thing. How many times are we going to rant about Sammy Watkins being undervalued and his situation sucks? And there we go. That's the one. The whole talent versus situation thing. Talent over situation. And it gets preached and it gets beat into the freaking ground. And then, boom, the NFL draft happens and Brashard Perryman's the 105. And David Cobb's going 202, 203, 204, which I've seen this week. And Buck Allen's the next superstar. And Matt Jones is a mid-second. And there's a reason that they were lower down the draft board before the NFL draft happened. It wasn't an accident. So that kind of gets under my skin. And I say everybody. I realize I'm just throwing a giant umbrella over this. But how quickly the tunes change, no?
Absolutely. And on that, I do want to add the point that obviously the NFL draft affects things. Situation isn't the only thing you're assessing. Where a player
draft pedigree is huge. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Draft pedigree is huge. It's a big part of the equation. So I'm sorry.
You're good, because that's exactly what I was going to say. Look at Jalen Strong. Jalen Strong was our number 3. We had him locked and loaded. But when the NFL tells us he's worth an early 3rd instead of the late 1st like we thought he was, we have to take that into consideration. Because, as much as, I'm learning, I'm taking classes, I'm trying to improve and be ready to be a scout, I'm not a scout. These teams have teams of scouts to evaluate these guys. And if they don't have them ranked as a late 1st pick, then we have to, account for that. And they still have Devin Smith ranked as a 2nd round pick. So we have to bring our own evaluation into that. We have to be able to evaluate the difference between what the NFL is going to be able to do with a player and if that's going to be able to translate to fantasy football. Robert Meacham was a 1st round NFL wide receiver, but tell me all the fantasy championships he won for you. He was great
about
for
as
New
many
Orleans.
as Greg Little got for you. About as many as Greg Little got for you. Or
but
A.J. Jenkins, John Baldwin, list goes on and on.
Yeah, but you compare those wide receivers, and Robert Meacham did a hell of a job in New Orleans. He did exactly what he was supposed to do, but none of it translated to consistent fantasy relevance. And that's going to be Devin Smith's role, I think. So that's where our job comes in, and it's to discern when a player is taken that high, if that means they're going to have a fantasy role or if they're just going to be better as an NFL talent.
There's an interesting correlation there between like Richard Sherman, unplayable in IDP, unrosterable in IDP. And the dude is an absolute animal. Maybe the best player in the whole league. And it's kind of an interesting parallel, to like a Devin Smith type, or like you said, Robert Meacham. Devin Smith may be a baller. Devin Smith might do all kinds of things for the Jets, and he may be fantasy relevant. I don't think he will be, so I'm saying it's true, but it's interesting to think. I've never thought a lot about it along those lines, drawing that parallel to IDP, but it's kind of similar, right?
Yeah, but at the same time, I think it's just because we lack the ability to score what these guys do. We can't score the fact that they're not throwing to their side of the field for 80% of the game. Richard Sherman and Darrelle Revis, besides Darrelle Revis, locking up interceptions, these guys are not usable in IDP because, they're not locking up pass deflections and tackles because they're not even getting thrown at because they're that good at what they do. Until we can utilize some kind of wide receiver eliminated per snap stat, it's just they're not going to be usable. And in the same way, we're not going to be able to use a wide receiver that takes the top off of a defense, that eliminates a cornerback because he had to chase him all the way downfield, and that's all he was able to do. They had to account for him on every play, but you don't get points for that.
Yeah, that's about right. Like Torrey Smith getting all those PIs called, that doesn't score points, but Torrey Smith was, like you said, taking away one, even two players. If they're rolling a safety over the top every snap when he's running his 9 routes.
Yeah, and that frees up the offense to do so many other things. It completely prevents them to stack the box, which that improves the run game. If they have to account for the run game, that means they can't double team another wide receiver because that means they're at least got to have 6 in the box, probably 7 if they're running a legit run game. And if you got Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker and Jason Morrow, it makes perfect sense as a pick, but it just doesn't work as a fantasy decision.
Yeah, just doesn't look like it's going to translate to me and you and several other people. But
yeah, and this just got way more philosophical on like how fantasy works than I was planning to get at 1:30 in the morning.
I'm not even sure what's going on right now, I'll be honest with you.
That's all right. I'm It's all right. You're doing pretty good for having no idea what's going on. But I think that's going to about do it for us this week before one of us falls asleep and the other just starts talking to himself. So, guys, June is quickly approaching, so I will be doing my next round of 2QB mock drafts to compile my next set of 2QB startup ADP. You guys were fantastic. You were awesome in helping me with this last set. And if you guys are interested in participating in the next round of it, shoot me a PM. Let me know. I'll get you added to the list, and we'll get this next round of it started up because that this is something that the 2QB world desperately needs, and I'm happy to do the work, and I just need y'all to help me put in some opinions. And if you guys like the podcast, if you like what we do, give us a review on iTunes, and most importantly, give us some feedback. Just PM, DM, shoot it out free on Twitter. Let everybody see. You guys, there's nothing you can say that's going to hurt our feelings. I promise. You can be as harsh as you want. I mean, try and make it constructive because you guys suck doesn't really help us a lot. But if it's you guys suck because, hey, I can work with that. I can do something with that. But, we just, anything you guys can do to help us improve our product, we really appreciate it. We thank you guys for listening. We really appreciate all the time you guys take sending in questions. We appreciate the time you take to listen to us every week, and we just really appreciate you listening in every week. It's really appreciated. And I said appreciate about 100 times right there. But it's because I can't get the thought out of my head. You guys are awesome. And thank you so much for listening. This has been the Dynasty Playbook, the Dynasty Fantasy Football subreddit's dedicated podcast. I've been your host, Drew. You can find me on Reddit at EAF Marine and on Twitter at DrewDawsonNFL. With me has been my excellent co-host, Tyler. You can find him on Reddit at Barles and on Twitter at HBOM9508. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again next week.